Every man carries within himself two forces that will never be reconciled: the desire to be respected and the fear of being feared. Between these two drives is born the moral disguise that society calls kindness. But Machiavelli already knew that kindness, when not deliberate, is merely submission disguised as virtue. The modern man has learned to smile when he wishes to dominate, and to ask for understanding when, in truth, he craves power. He lives among masks, believing that hiding his shadow makes him more civilized, when in reality it only makes him more predictable. The truth is that the world does not reward purity, it rewards control. The human mind is not divided between good and evil. That is the comfortable lie of the weak. It is divided between those who command their impulses and those who are commanded by them. That is why Machiavelli never wrote for saints, but for princes. He knew that the man who seeks approval is as much a slave as the one who fears punishment. Power does not spring from love. It is born from clarity about human nature, and such clarity requires looking into the dark without fear. Every man who fears his own shadow ends up kneeling before the shadow of another. The dark mind is not an evil mind. It is a lucid one, detached from moral illusion. It understands that people do not act out of justice, but out of interest, that loyalty is rarely eternal, and that compassion is often nothing more than a disguise for manipulation. The man who sees this without anger begins to understand the true board of power. He does not react, he observes. He does not try to change the game. He simply decides when to enter and when to withdraw. His coldness is not the absence of emotion, it is mastery over it. Discomfort begins when the listener realizes that everything he believed to be virtue may have been weakness, that his patience, empathy, and desire to be understood may have been the very weapons used against him. It is here that silence becomes dangerous, for the man begins to hear what he never wished to admit, that the world does not ignore him out of injustice, but because he himself has learned to become invisible. Machiavelli would say that true awakening does not happen when a man decides to fight, but when he decides to see without illusion, to see power for what it truly is, a constant exchange between fear and need. At that moment, the mind awakens to a new kind of consciousness, cold, observant, merciless toward itself. From this point, there is no return to innocence. There is only the choice between remaining submissive to one's own weakness or learning to master what once ruled him. The first step to understanding the three types of dark mind is accepting that power does not corrupt. It merely reveals those who were already corrupted by their own denial. The dark mind is not the one that seeks evil, but the one that understands the invisible structure of power. It is the consciousness that observes human intentions without judgment, that sees fear behind courage and self-interest behind generosity. It does not feed on anger, but on perception. It is the mind that has learned not to react immediately, because it knows that the first impulse is almost always the confession of weakness. Where most see injustice, the dark mind sees movement. Where most look for guilt, it identifies strategy. Machiavelli would call this lucidity virtù, not in the moral sense, but in the ability to shape chance through the force of will. The man of virtù understands that there is no balance between ethics and power, only hierarchy between intentions. He knows the world is a theater of appearances, and whoever controls his own image also controls the gaze of others. The dark mind does not seek approval, because it understands that being admired is a risk. Every admiration creates expectations, and every expectation is a leash. This form of consciousness is not achieved through reading or suffering, but through constant observation of one's own nature. The ordinary man flees from his instincts, trying to purify them. The lucid man disciplines them. He knows that anger can be strength and fear can be prudence. He understands that desire, when restrained, becomes direction, and that silence, when chosen, becomes dominion. The dark mind does not eliminate chaos. It governs it. The mistake of the weak is to believe that purity is power. Purity is predictable, and what is predictable can be manipulated. The man who tries too hard to appear good forgets that every act of kindness, when it is not a choice, is submission. The dark mind acts with calculation, not with guilt. It knows that morality shifts according to context, but human nature remains the same. It is not deceived by speeches about equality or justice, because it recognizes that behind every ideal there is a silent struggle for dominance. This lucidity comes with a price. The man who awakens to it loses the comfort of illusions and the company of the naive. He begins to walk in silence, not out of isolation, but out of selectivity. He speaks little because he understands that words are weapons, and every unnecessary revelation is a gift to the enemy. The dark mind does not wish to be understood, it wishes to be inevitable. In essence, what defines this mind is not the content of its thoughts, but the control over them. It thinks like a strategist and feels like a predator that has learned not to attack by instinct. Power ceases to be an objective and becomes a natural consequence of presence. The man who reaches this level of consciousness does not need to win to be feared, nor to prove himself to be respected. He simply exists, and that alone is enough to reorder the hierarchy around him. The submissive mind is the one that renounces its own power in exchange for acceptance. It believes that being understood is more important than being respected. It lives asking for permission to exist, adjusting the tone of its voice, the rhythm of its speech, the size of its desire. It is a kind of weakness disguised as kindness. The man learns to be gentle, but inside he carries a silent revolt. Machiavelli would call this man a servant of his own image. He wants to appear just, correct, balanced, and because of that, he loses the survival instinct that protects the strong. The submissive fears conflict, and because he fears it, he becomes a slave to those who provoke it. The submissive mind is predictable. It reacts with anxiety in the face of disapproval and confuses empathy with surrender. It grows accustomed to apologizing, even when it is right, because it has learned that harmony is worth more than truth. The problem is that this harmony is artificial. It is the price the weak pay to avoid being tested. Each time it yields, it reinforces another's dominance. Each time it seeks to be understood, it gives up its own territory. The submissive believes that avoiding tension is wisdom, but what he calls peace is merely the absence of courage. This kind of mind lives imprisoned by contradiction. It desires respect, but fears being feared. It wants freedom, but depends on the validation of others to act. The submissive man is the final product of a society that teaches men to suppress everything that would make them dangerous. Their assertiveness, their coldness, their ability to impose limits. He is the reflection of a collective fear of untamed masculinity. That is why he becomes invisible. He is respected only by those who are also powerless. Machiavelli would regard this mind with strategic contempt. He would say it is useless in the political game because it fails to understand that power is rarely granted. It is taken, maintained, and defended. The man who seeks approval is always ready to be manipulated because his decisions depend on others' perception. He becomes a hostage to praise, addicted to recognition. He is the kind of man who works more than others and receives less, who loves more and is less desired, who speaks of peace and harvests indifference. His gentleness is not virtue, it is fear disguised as morality. The submissive mind is the first form of darkness, the one that does not dare to look at itself. It represses anger, pride, and the desire for power, believing that this makes it superior. But what is unused decays, and what is repressed rules from within. The submissive thinks he controls his emotions, when in truth, they control him. His fear of rejection makes him accept the unacceptable. His need to be loved makes him serve those who despise him. He prides himself on his restraint, but he does not see that true mastery is not avoiding confrontation. It is knowing when confrontation is inevitable. In the end, the submissive mind believes that the world is unjust to the good. The lucid man understands that the world is merely honest with the predictable. After submission comes awakening, and with it, chaos. The reactive mind is the next stage of weakness. The moment when a man realizes he has been controlled by everyone, yet still hasn't learned to control himself. It is the phase of rebellion, impulsive reaction, wounded pride. The reactive man believes he is finally free, when in truth he has only inverted the roles. From servant, he becomes hostage to his own anger. He no longer accepts being dominated, but he also doesn't know how to dominate. Machiavelli would say he is the kind of prince who mistakes fury for power and speed for strategy. The reactive mind is noisy. It speaks too much, defends itself before being attacked, and tries at all costs to prove it is no longer weak. This need to assert strength is paradoxically the clearest sign of the weakness that still exists. True power does not react, it directs. The reactive man, on the other hand, lives in a constant state of war. Everything that contradicts him is seen as a threat. He tries to win arguments, to impose respect, to intimidate, and in this desperate search for control, he exposes precisely the point that makes him vulnerable: the ego. The reactive man is the opposite of the strategist. He doesn't observe, he responds. He acts in the heat of emotion, believing that acting quickly is the same as acting correctly. His impulsiveness makes him waste energy on meaningless battles, and his vanity blinds him to the consequences. He is the one who breaks alliances out of pride, who speaks his mind and regrets it in silence, who confuses sincerity with lack of calculation. He calls his brutality authenticity, but behind it there is only fear of being seen as weak. Machiavelli would see this mind as a threat to its own power. The reactive ruler destroys what he conquers because he does not know how to sustain it. He believes that authority is imposed through force, but forgets that lasting power depends on perception, and perception requires coldness. The reactive man is satisfied with winning the moment, but he loses the time. He reacts to stimulus, not to context. He lives as a hostage to provocation, like a warrior who attacks every shadow, believing himself surrounded by enemies. This kind of mind is common in the modern man who has awakened to the game of power, but is still enslaved by the emotions the world planted in him. He rebels against external control, but continues to be controlled from within. The anger he feels is legitimate. It comes from the late realization that he was used, humiliated, erased. The problem is that he doesn't transform this anger into method. He explodes, then feels guilty. He confronts, then regrets. The energy that could be used to build is wasted in defensive gestures. The reactive mind is dangerous, but unstable. It threatens the system yet does not understand it. It is the stage in which the man sees the game, but does not know how to play it. His strength is real but directionless. His lucidity is partial and therefore self-destructive. Only when that energy is contained, disciplined, and converted into calculation does the third form of consciousness emerge: the sovereign mind. The sovereign mind is the point where darkness ceases to be an enemy and becomes an instrument. It is the stage of inner dominion, where a man no longer seeks to prove, react, or please, only to control. While the submissive man surrenders power and the reactive man wastes it, the sovereign gathers it in silence. He understands that true command does not require constant force, but constancy within force. His presence alters the environment before he even speaks. Machiavelli would call him the hidden prince, the one whose authority depends not on shouting but on perception. The sovereign mind is cold, but not from insensitivity, from calculation. It feels deeply, yet never allows emotion to dictate the gesture. The sovereign commands the timing of actions because he knows that every movement carries a cost. He observes before reacting, and that pause unsettles those who live by impulse. His calm is interpreted as mystery, and mystery is one of the purest forms of power. The man no one can decipher becomes inevitably respected, for the unknown intimidates more than the violent. Unlike the reactive, the sovereign does not seek to win every conflict. He selects the ones worthy of his energy and ignores the rest with strategic indifference. Machiavelli would write that the wise ruler prefers to lose a battle if it ensures the dominion of the war. The sovereign mind applies the same principle to everyday life. It yields when it chooses, strikes when it must, and above all, decides when to be seen. It understands that invisibility, when used with intention, is the most efficient armor. This mind has also learned the value of silence. The sovereign speaks little, not out of fear of being misunderstood, but because he knows that every word creates an expectation, and expectations are vulnerabilities. He uses silence as a weapon of deterrence. It forces others to reveal more than they intended, compelling them to fill the space with their own anxiety. Thus, power shifts from the one who speaks to the one who observes. The sovereign mind does not seek to dominate others. It creates the atmosphere in which others self-dominate in his presence. The sovereign also understands the nature of human emotions. He knows that another's anger is a sign of impotence, and envy, a confession of inferiority. He does not take offense. He diagnoses. His perception is analytical, almost clinical. He does not react to provocation because he has learned that true control is refusing to be drawn into another's game. His strength lies in the absence of urgency. He has nothing to prove, only to maintain balance. The sovereign is the man who walks through chaos without haste, for he understands that chaos is merely the reflection of those who have lost direction. Machiavelli would say that this is the man who has conquered the most difficult empire, the empire over himself. He is neither easily loved nor easily hated, because he is indecipherable. His power is silent, his presence is command. He needs no threat, for his calm is threat enough. The sovereign does not fight the shadow, he governs it, and in doing so, becomes untouchable. Machiavelli understood something that few men still perceive. Power is not acquired by chance, nor maintained by force. It is sustained by control, first over oneself, then over the environment. This is the silent law that governs all empires, from ancient thrones to modern corporations. The man who wishes to rule the world must first rule the impulses that would make him react to it. Because the most dangerous enemy is not the other, it is one's own reflection before provocation. Most men confuse control with repression. They believe that holding back emotions means suffocating them. Machiavelli would teach the opposite. To dominate is not to deny, but to channel. The man who tries to eliminate his anger becomes apathetic. The one who observes and directs it becomes calculated. Control is the point of balance between emotion and coldness, between impulse and method. It is the power to choose when to act, when to remain silent, when to let silence do the work for him. Control is what transforms energy into presence. The man without control is the plaything of chance. He reacts to circumstances as an animal reacts to sound. He is predictable, and the predictable can be manipulated. The controlled man, on the other hand, dictates the rhythm of events. He does not react to offense. He measures the effect of his response. He does not seek to defend himself. He builds the perception that he doesn't need to. Machiavelli would say this is the art of authority, making others interpret your silence as decision, not hesitation. Control is the core of the sovereign mind because it creates scarcity. What is scarce is valuable. What is valuable is feared. A man who wastes neither words, gestures, nor emotions becomes a presence others must decipher, and what cannot be understood commands respect. That is why the strong speak little. Mystery protects power more than strength sustains it. But control demands discipline, and discipline is not rigidity. It is precision. It is waking up to one's own chaos and shaping it with patience. The controlled man is not dominated by urgency, vanity, or the need to be noticed. He moves as someone who has already foreseen every possible reaction. This confuses the impulsive and disarms the manipulative, because control, when complete, eliminates predictability. Machiavelli wrote that it is safer to be feared than loved, but the truly dangerous man seeks neither. He seeks to be calculated. Fear and respect are merely byproducts of visible control. He does not need to threaten, because his coldness already announces the limit. He is the kind of presence that imposes order simply by observing. The law is simple. He who masters himself becomes untouchable. The rest is reaction disguised as power. Before any external ascension, a man must conquer the internal throne, the place where silence governs anger and calm decides destiny. This is the true power Machiavelli described, though few have ever had the courage to understand it. Power is not an abstract idea. It manifests in daily gestures, in pauses, in silences, and in choices that go unnoticed by the distracted. The sovereign mind, shaped by control, turns ordinary environments into fields of influence. In work, in relationships, or in social disputes, everything reduces to one law. He who observes with coldness sees first. He who reacts with calmness wins later. Machiavelli would see the modern corporate world as a disguised principality, where position is the throne, the gaze is the sword, and perception is the shield. At work, the difference between the submissive, the reactive, and the sovereign is evident. The submissive obeys orders and believes obedience will make him indispensable. The reactive questions everything but wastes energy trying to prove he is right. The sovereign acts in silence, dominates through efficiency, and creates intellectual dependence. He doesn't need to compete openly because he understands that true hierarchy is mental. When he speaks little. When he observes, he records everything. He does not seek to be noticed, he seeks to be necessary, and necessity is the most stable form of power. In relationships, the game is subtler, but no less strategic. The submissive man seeks approval, shapes his opinions to please, and confuses attention with affection. The reactive man demands respect, tries to impose authority through force, and ends up losing control at the first sign of rejection. The sovereign, however, understands the value of distance. He doesn't explain, doesn't justify, doesn't chase. He knows that absence, when used with calculation, is worth more than any attempt at persuasion. The sovereign mind understands the human paradox. The more predictable a desire, the less value it holds. That is why it remains enigmatic. Mystery is both its defense and its weapon. In social status, the same dynamic repeats itself. The common man tries to appear powerful. The reactive man tries to convince others he is. The sovereign man simply behaves as if he already were. His posture is silent, his expression controlled, his gaze unhurried. Power at that level doesn't need to be displayed, only perceived. The sovereign dominates through naturalness. The simple fact that he doesn't seek attention already places him above those who beg for it. The respect he inspires doesn't come from what he possesses, but from what he doesn't need to show. Machiavelli stated that to govern is to maintain the appearance of virtue while acting with calculation. In today's world, that translates to the art of seeming ordinary, while thinking like one who already sees the invisible mechanisms at play. The sovereign mind doesn't need to shine. It creates the light others follow, and when everyone depends on his rhythm, he rules without coronation, without throne, without noise. In any environment, the outcome is the same. The submissive is useful, the reactive is feared for a short time, and the sovereign is inevitable. He wins not through force, but through patience. Because in the game of power, the one who is in a hurry always loses to the one who is in control. Mental weakness is not revealed in failure, but in reactions. It is in the moment a man is contradicted that his true level of self-mastery is exposed. The weak mind cannot endure silence, because silence forces it to think. It needs to justify itself, explain itself, prove something, not to others, but to itself. It lives in a constant state of defense, interpreting any disagreement as a threat. Machiavelli would observe such behavior with analytical disdain. The man who needs to be understood is always manipulable, for he becomes dependent on the approval of those who listen to him. One of the most visible signs of a weak mind is excessive speech. One talks too much when one does not trust one's own value. The man who commands knows that authority is born from the weight of his words, and weight lies in what is rare, not in what is abundant. The weak mind turns every conversation into an attempt to persuade, every gesture into a plea for validation. He is the type of man who needs to be noticed, and that need betrays him. The more he tries to prove strength, the more he exposes dependence.
Power does not need to be announced. It manifests in how one occupies space, and the weak, without realizing it, fill that space with noise. Another sign is impulsive reaction. The weak mind is easily provoked, living as if the world owes it something. The slightest criticism becomes an insult, the smallest insult, a war. This inability to choose one's battles makes it predictable, and predictability is the first stage of defeat.
The man who commands himself does not rush, because he understands that time is the true battlefield. The weak want to win now, the strong want to win always. There is also the most disguised symptom, the desire to be understood. The weak man believes that others' understanding confirms his identity. He wants to be read, interpreted, accepted, but whoever over-explains hands over the keys to his own domain. Machiavelli would write that a prince should never fully reveal his intentions, for opacity is a form of power. When others do not understand your limits, they fear crossing them. The weak man, by opening his heart, exposes his fortress, and he who shows every door invites the enemy to enter. The weak mind also confuses emotion with authenticity. It believes that expressing everything is a sign of truth, but absolute transparency is merely vulnerability in disguise. The lucid man feels deeply but chooses what to reveal. Strength does not lie in reacting. It lies in restraint. The last and most dangerous sign is resentment. The weak feed on the past, collecting injustices as justifications. They live trapped in memories of humiliation and by reliving them reinforce their submission. The sovereign mind, by contrast, uses pain as a measure, not as identity. Machiavelli would say that weakness is the natural state of those who still believe the world owes them something. Power begins when a man realizes that nothing is personal. Everything is movement. The rest is a wounded ego pretending to be moral. Taming the shadow is not about destroying it. It is about transforming it into an instrument. The man who tries to eliminate the dark side of himself condemns himself to fragmentation. He becomes divided between what he feels and what he shows, between what he desires and what he judges as moral. Machiavelli would say that this is the kind of man who will never govern anything, because he cannot govern his own instinct. The process of ascension begins when a man accepts that evil is not the opposite of good, but its raw material. What he does with that energy defines his destiny. The shadow contains anger, pride, desire, ambition, forces that society has taught men to repress. But what is repressed does not disappear. It merely changes form. Contained anger becomes apathy, denied pride turns into guilt, suppressed desire transforms into emotional dependency. To tame the shadow is to bring it into the light with discipline, without letting it take the throne. It is to observe one's own chaos calmly and learn how to direct it. When a man turns anger into focus, fear into awareness, and desire into purpose, he ceases to be a prisoner of his emotions and becomes their commander. This mastery is not achieved through rituals or self-help formulas. It requires silence, introspection, and repetition. To tame the shadow is to wake each day aware of one's own weaknesses and keep them under surveillance. As a general watches over unruly soldiers, it is an exercise in emotional coldness. The man who practices such vigilance does not become insensitive. He becomes selective. He feels everything, but chooses what deserves a reaction, and that choice makes him superior. Ascension also depends on the ability to endure isolation. The man who masters himself no longer belongs to the masses. He does not feed on external approval nor bend to social expectations. His serenity is solitary, because few understand the calm of one who has accepted the price of consciousness. The sovereign mind lives among the crowd but never within it. It observes human movement with the same detachment that a strategist observes the battlefield. To tame the shadow is, ultimately, to renounce the need for purity. The pure man is vulnerable because he believes justice is a universal law. The lucid man knows justice is a convention. He acts according to principles but applies them with calculation. Machiavelli would call him virtuoso, not in the moral sense, but in the ability to adapt without losing essence. Virtue is exactly that, the harmony between instinct and reason, between strength and restraint. In the end, ascension is not visible. It does not translate into status, money, or recognition. The true sign of mastery is the absence of reaction. When a man can be provoked and remain silent, he has reached the highest level of power, the one in which he no longer needs to defeat anyone to be invincible. Machiavelli wrote for princes, but he spoke about men. In every line, he hinted at a truth few can bear. Power is not a reward, it is a burden that only the lucid can carry. The man who seeks to be loved is condemned to servitude, for love is fickle and respect is selective. True dominion is born when a man becomes sufficient unto himself, when he no longer needs to be understood in order to act, nor praised in order to continue. At that point, silence becomes language, and solitude becomes a throne. Machiavelli's voice endures through the centuries not because he taught manipulation, but because he revealed what morality tries to conceal. He understood that human nature is constant, and that all power is a reflection of self-mastery. He who does not control his mind loses his body. He who does not govern his emotions loses his empire. The man who believes he can be just with everyone, honest with everyone, good with everyone, has yet to understand that every virtue demands a measure of cruelty. Kindness without calculation is an invitation to exploitation. Honesty without coldness is public disarmament, and compassion without discernment is merely the fear of appearing strong. Machiavelli would say that every man lives between two risks: the risk of being dominated and the risk of dominating without purpose. The first is weakness, the second, destruction. Balance lies in ruling without needing to display power, in exercising control without demanding attention. That is the highest degree of influence, the silent power. It is there that a man ceases to be moved by external wills and begins to shape the environment around him with a single gesture of presence. The sovereign man is not the one who abstains from evil, but the one who has learned to use it without corruption. He does not avoid the shadow, he manages it. He can act with coldness without losing his humanity, be implacable without being cruel. He knows that, at certain moments, mercy is weakness, and distance is the highest form of respect. His morality is not ruled by abstract principles, but by effectiveness. What protects his inner empire is what works. Everything else is noise, distraction, sentimentality masked as virtue. In the end, Machiavelli would leave a warning. The man who understands power but does not apply it will forever live under the rule of those who use it without scruple. Knowledge is useless when fear dictates behavior. The sovereign mind does not fear seeming cold because it understands that coldness is simply clarity without emotion. It is at this point that a man stops living as a piece and begins to act as a player. And then arises the question that echoes beyond the video, beyond the words. Do you control the darkness within you, or has it merely learned to imitate your voice? The answer is not in what you say, but in what you silence. True power is imperceptible, and perhaps that is why almost no one attains it. Do not seek to be understood. Seek to be inevitable.